Hello again everyone, seasonal greetings and welcome to the Advent window for the 12th of December. And behind this window, Richard and Nick have sent me the following question. Given time and a modest budget, what 6x4 terrain setup would you build and what games would you play on it? Describe the techniques and material you'd use. Over the course of the last year, you might be forgiven for thinking that I'd almost forgotten about flashing blades. Our game of the Three Musketeers and the Cardinal's Guide derived from the pages of the books by Alexandre Dumas and the films by Richard Lester. But no, we've not forgotten. And this window gives me the opportunity to think about one classic piece of terrain that I've not yet built for flashing blades, but I would really like to do so. As some of you might know, having played the game, and others might have heard about, with flashing blades is played on an 18-inch square table, rather more accurately a board. So it's quite a compressed space, which allows the combatants to get into range of their rapiers pretty quickly. It's short, deadly, and hopefully exciting. But the 6x4 table idea remains a long-standing wish that I hope one day I can actually bring into reality. And while the game with flashing blades features sword play and sword fighting of all different sorts and styles, that's just the fencing part of the action, so to speak. It's possible to understand fencing and the different schools of swordsmanship in the early 17th century without a wider canvas, but if it's just the fencing which we're recreating, that's just part of the story, that's just the skirmish. The key background to those fencing engagements, which I mentioned in an Advent window a couple of years ago, is really the world of competing nobles, factional rivalries, dynastic competition, and the lure of power. And nowhere in Paris in the 1610s and 1620s was power more obviously displayed than at the Royal Palace of the Louvre. And this is the Royal Palace of the Louvre long before Versailles was constructed. And that was the chief palace within Paris at which the royal court was displaying power, patronage and control, or attempting to do so, over the nobility. One of my favourite books over the last couple of years is a book called The Power and Reputation at the Court of Louis XIII by Sharon Kettering. And that shows a world of politically focused and orchestrated drama taking place at the Louvre. It's the centre of court politics and also court ballets, which had a particular propaganda and political control element under one of Louis XIII's chief ministers, the Duc de Luynes. And I thought that this world in which power and display could compete on a stage, literally and also figuratively, would be just an amazing piece of terrain to try and construct. One of the difficulties I think that we've had with skirmish games is that they fit a small footprint really well. That compresses the action and the time taken to enjoy the game. However, the one thing that we'd like to sort of build is the interior of buildings, and that is really quite tricky because you're almost in a situation that once you build the inside of a building, you're into a world of creating terrain or scenery which is compatible with the figure size which we've chosen for the game, 28mm, but also is, let's put it honestly, a little bit like doll's house building, which really has all sorts of connotations which just don't fit that well with historical miniature wargaming. So instead of building tank traps and pillboxes, we'd be looking for tables and chairs, maybe grandfather clocks. You get the idea. It's something which doesn't particularly sit that well. So for a long time we'd thought about building the inside of a tavern so that musketeers could swing on chandeliers and throw bottles and chairs at each other. But it's quite a difficult board to construct on an 18 by 18 inch table. The inside of the tavern would be the entirety of the board. However, if we liberate ourselves from an 18-inch square baseboard and we look at a 6x4 table, well, then the megalomania really starts to kick in. For our Louvre, we'd probably want to include the Grand Salon, the centrepiece of so many moments of political display. We'd possibly also want to have part of the table which is covered with the courtyard, at which guests and obviously the various combatants can arrive. Perhaps also a series of rooms, antechambers, in which the king's ministers could meet foreign ambassadors, and no doubt one or two spies and emissaries of dubious character. We'd probably also want something a little bit more prosaic, like a kitchen. Always good to fight around a kitchen. Lots of hot things to throw at people, pans of boiling water. You get the idea. And finally, ideally, a staircase for a grand entrance of the main villain of the piece, and also a suitable place from which people can fall off or indeed swing from various different chandeliers. But hang on, Sidney, hang on a minute. What did the Advent window say? Well, going back to the Advent window, given time and a modest budget. Oh, well, I suppose a modest budget can constrain these plans of huge building constructions, but I never knew a king of France who was in any way modest. But I suppose Rich and Nick, while not the kings of France, they probably do have some sway over what we're actually going to do. So one of my thoughts was building a series of rooms, and they could be different sized, almost like if you think of boxes on a table, which are interchangeable and compatible with each other. And within each box, a room could be constructed. Some of the boxes, for instance the Grand Salon, may be quite large. Some would be much more modest, the antechambers for the ambassadors to meet in, for example. But they'd all fit together on the table. Now, constructing the Palace of the Louvre sounds like a daunting undertaking, and a very expensive one at that. But building a series of maybe 6, 7, 8 different boxes open to view, in which each of them could contain different furniture, a different environment, a different challenge for the combatants, that might be possible. The different rooms could be constructed from a base of MDF, and then the walls could be either also MDF, or to save a little bit of weight, could be constructed from foam board, which I find a really useful piece of building material. The doors could be 3D printed, or potentially also scratch built using card. The flooring, another potentially 3D print if one wanted to go for a carpet effect, but also I think it's easy to scratch build the various tiles for floor, which might look quite good. Or indeed, there's lots of online producers and art libraries out there which have created flooring for D&D games and other role-playing games. Some of those might be suitable for use as a more elegant flooring than just dungeon floor tiles. Any sort of added details such as staircasing or chandeliers, that's probably going to take a little bit more work, and that's going to be something which is going to need to be tailored for that particular room, but I don't think that's going to be impossible. I had thought that chandeliers could be added across the room using a series of different wire mountings so that the chandelier sits in the room and maybe would have some form of hook on which a figure could be attached, especially swinging from the chandelier. That's an idea. We'll have to see how that survives contact with reality, though. And finally, I think for the furniture within the rooms, there is actually quite a lot of 3D printed furniture on Thingiverse and other 3D printing suppliers. So anyone with a 3D printer, or indeed a friend who's got a 3D printer, would be able to construct furniture fairly easily. And of course, there's also a scratch-built option which is available. The furniture probably doesn't need to go to the point of being like doll's house quality. It's really a representation of something which could be fought around or indeed thrown or slung at the unfortunate opponent. So that allows us to create on a 6x4 table a big version of With Flashing Blades, at which the King of France and the Queen of France can actually take the stage, not in an 18-inch square board, but in their royal palace, and to use their power and magnificence in order to awe and impress the assembled nobility of France, with, of course, just the Musketeers and the Cardinal's Guard, and potentially some other factions involved around, just to spoil the royal entertainment. Well, I think in the season of Christmas, we're all about breathtaking spectacles, and building the Louvre on a 6x4 table would certainly be a task worthy of the season.